This is an unabridged reading of Beyond the War of Thorns, Chapter 1, Part 1. High atop a towering Ashenvale oak tree, a peculiar figure balanced himself with the assistance of a grappling hook. His skin was green like the leaves around him, but other than that he seemed quite out of place in such a colorful, lush forest. He wore a long, bullet-hole-riddled red cloak, a tricorn with a single decorative feather, pouches packed with gunpowder, and his regalia was more commonly found on the high seas. He was also an orc deep in Night Elf territory, where his kind typically dare not travel. This orc surveyed the Calderae town named Astronar from what he assumed was a safe distance. More specifically, he observed the aftermath of a Night Elf massacre perpetrated by Horde rogues. "Curses," he said under his breath, visibly shaken by the horrors he was witnessing through his rather large brass telescope. The Horde had reached a crossroads, and he would not walk down the dark path they had chosen. The orc's parents named him Verosh Ironcore, but it had been decades since he'd used his birth name. All those who knew him now simply called him by his codename, Iron Ghost. Having lost his parents to the Alliance at a young age, he had spent his teenage years in service to the pirates that found him adrift in the ocean, far from any landmass, and close to dehydration or worse. Years later, he would courageously earn his freedom and find his way to Orgrimmar, where he would join the Horde, and despite his turbulent youth, he would never lose the values his father and mother instilled in him since childhood: honor and courage. "There is no honor in this, Sylvanas," he grunted, his anger increasing with every mutilated Calderae body he saw. Over the last few weeks, whispers and rumors had swirled throughout the darkest streets of Orgrimmar. While it was widely known that the Horde would soon be marching towards Silithus, likely to secure the area's large Azerite deposits, there seemed to be something else at play. Several rogues had received highly sensitive missions for the upcoming campaign. At face value, this was nothing out of the ordinary. Still, Iron Ghost's instincts had told him to keep his ear to the ground. Something dark was stirring, and the orc had to be ready. The rogues tasked with this secretive plan were especially tight-lipped about it, even more so than usual. If you had the chance to question them about it, the response was predictable. "We're headed to Silithus. What's it to you?" They would respond with their eyes locked intensely onto whoever asked, as their hand hovered over their dagger's hilt. Iron Ghost knew, however, that it was just a matter of time before someone slipped up. A single word whispered in error within the dark alleys of the drag. "Teldrassil." Could the Banshee Queen commit such a betrayal, even after the two factions had joined together to defeat the Burning Legion? And even after Azeroth now had a chance to see peace unlike ever before? Was Sylvanas capable of such evil? Iron Ghost did not have a good answer to any of these questions. But the Banshee Queen was ruthless, but would only be so brazen if it was absolutely necessary. The orc had done his own investigating, and he found no evidence of Alliance aggression save for the spies that frequented Orgrimmar's shadows. Business as usual. This was no reason to plunge the Horde into an all-out war, but today he was witnessing the start of Sylvanas' bloody campaign. The sounds of catapults and skirmishes could now be heard inching closer from the south, so Iron Ghost prepared to make his retreat. With a light whizzing sound emitted by the grappling hook, he lowered himself to the forest floor. He then retracted the device into his sleeve, but before the orc could stash his telescope into its pouch, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure reflected on the object's metallic surface. The orc scarcely had time to duck and roll before a giant nightsaber nearly decapitated him. This was no regular large cat, though. The moon-shaped figures on its shoulders, the vibrant trinkets hanging from its collar, and the light pieces of armor scattered across the beast's dark purple figure made it clear. This was a Night Elf druid, and the intense murderous look in its eyes made its intent very clear. The two stood still for a moment, eyeing each other over, when suddenly Iron Ghost spoke a single word. "Rone." In Darnassian, the Night Elf's native tongue, Rone meant peaceful. Under other circumstances, Most Calderae would laugh at such a clumsily blurted out expression. But at this moment, as the Night Elf's lands were being invaded, such a phrase only served to infuriate the druid. The Night Saber lunged at the orc once again with inhuman speed. With not a millisecond to spare, Iron Ghost managed to draw one of his swords, a large cutlass whose blade would be more appropriate for a two-handed sword, and block what would have been a brutal slash to his neck. Almost immediately, the druid slashed with his other claw, striking Iron Ghost on the shoulder. The impact launched the orc a few yards back and ripped his left spalder clean off of his body. "Rone! Rone!" shouted Iron Ghost in a desperate attempt to avoid bloodshed. But the druid would not relent and continued to attack with tooth and claw. The orc blocked and dodged all he could until he saw an opening. Parrying one of the druid's attacks, Iron Ghost managed to destabilize the Night Elf for a second, and with his left fist he drilled a punch into the attacker's lower back, striking its kidney. The druid rolled away, momentarily stunned from the painful blow, but quickly recovered as it turned to face Iron Ghost once more. The orc stretched out his blade with his right hand as a deterrent from further attacks, and the two circled each other for a few seconds. With the Night Elf's attention drawn to the blade, Iron Ghost subtly slipped his left hand into one of the pouches hanging from the back section of his belt. The druid suddenly stopped, and a small green flicker seemed to flash within its eyes. "What's this?" thought Iron Ghost as he felt something coiling around his feet and legs. The orc looked down for a moment to see several vines wrapping themselves around his lower body, locking him in place. He then looked up, remembering where the real threat stood, only to find the druid mid-air as it closed in for the kill. With not a moment to spare, Iron Ghost flung a handful of powdery substance into the Night Elf's face. On impact, the powder expanded into a small cloud of highly irritable dust, which infiltrated the druid's eyes, nostrils, and mouth. With the beast temporarily blind, Iron Ghost began cutting and ripping through the vines that were holding him in place. Once free, he extended his arm and launched his grappling hook several yards away where it latched onto a tree. The orc was rapidly pulled far from the incapacitated druid, and using the gained momentum, the rogue pushed himself off of the tree and flew for a few extra yards. He landed with a roll and quickly switched to a sprint. "That should create some good distance between me and the cat," Iron Ghost thought as he headed west into the Stone Talon Mountains. Before he could leave the Ashenvale Forest, though, he heard a powerful growl, not far in the distance, but rather a few yards back. "Blasted cat! Already recovered!" exclaimed the orc, as he looked back over his shoulders to see a druid leaping from tree to tree, closing distance with a grace and swiftness only a feral beast could achieve. "I have no choice," he thought. "I have to fight." Drawing his second cutlass, Iron Ghost turned to face his attacker and crossed his blades in front of him, ready to kill or be killed. The feral druid stopped a few paces away from the orc, and the two locked eyes as their battle to the death now seemed inevitable. "There! It be one of them!" Shouts suddenly rang from just south of Iron Ghost and the druid. Distracted by their fight, neither the orc nor the Night Elf had realized how far the horde troops had traveled towards them. The red-clad army was now only a stone's throw away from the pair, and before Iron Ghost or the druid could react, a giant flaming boulder, launched by a catapult, was already barreling down on their position. The feral druid spun its head towards the horde troops as soon as it heard the shouts, but had no time to react as the fiery mass struck the ground just a couple of yards from where it was standing, and then all went dark. Further to the southeast, the battle had just concluded, and the victors were now reveling in their conquest. "For the Horde!" shouted a Tauren warrior as he raised his battle axe to the skies. "For the Horde!" exclaimed the troll hunter as his pet raptor let out a deafening screech through its bloodied fangs. "For the Horde!" followed an orc warrior as he lifted a Night Elf druid's decapitated head in triumph. Not all Horde soldiers, however, shared in the same enthusiasm and bloodlust as the rest of the squadron did. A handful of individuals walked several paces behind the rest, and their mostly clean weapons did not go unnoticed by their leader. "Care to fight alongside your horde, brothers?" shouted Commander Red as he marched toward the 5 recruits. The commander carried 2 massive war axes, had a thick red beard as his nickname suggested, and fought with the rage and fury of 10 orcs. His gaze was enough to defeat just about anyone on the battlefield, but as he approached a smaller group, he was met by another equally imposing warrior. "I will not shed any more Night Elf blood, Commander," spoke a large Tauren as he stood up to face Red. "These Kaldare may not be our friends, but we stood together to defend Kalimdor and the rest of Azeroth from the demons," he continued. "What we are doing today has no honor." The Tauren warrior was gentle, yet stern with his words. As was common of Shu-Halo soldiers, he wore a headdress adorned with feathers found on the eagles of his native Mulgore, and his armor consisted of multiple leather cords, fastened to the bones and hides of other animals found throughout Kalimdor. In his hand was a giant war axe adorned with various trinkets that represented his tribe, and on his back he carried a colossal totem, equally adorned and equally lethal in combat. Although the Tauren was young, having only recently reached adulthood, he was one of the largest and strongest soldiers in the squadron, a detail that did not go unnoticed by Commander Red. "You're making a big mistake, kid," responded the commander. To a degree, Red sympathized with the Tauren. His honor was of the highest importance to the veteran orc warrior, but deserting the horde was not an option in his mind. "We must trust the war chief. Kondo Shatterpath, is it?" continued Commander Red as he recalled the Tauren's name. "I knew your father, young one," he added. "He was a fierce warrior, and an honorable one as well. I respect your concerns, Kondo, but in order to uphold honor, we must never abandon the horde." The orc hoped his words would convince the warrior to rejoin the squadron. The commander did not want to lose such a formidable recruit from his ranks, and he also did not want to draw the Tauren's blood. It was customary for horde deserters to be killed on the spot, something Red was willing to do, but only if absolutely necessary. "The boy be right, Commander," spoke up an old troll shaman, standing behind the Tauren. "There be some bad juju in what we be doing." Commander Red's face hardened again, clearly displeased by the troll's input, but before the orc could respond, another interjected as well. "Did the horde learn nothing from Garrosh's madness, Commander?" questioned a tall and heavy-set Pandaren, while adjusting his adorned conical hat and the various miniature kegs that hung from his armor. "This isn't worth it, cousin," spoke up another, shorter and slightly slimmer Pandaren from under his red tiger-shaped helm as he leaned against the tree several paces further back. "I say we catch the next boat to Pandaria and forget all of this," he added in a nonchalant tone, clearly unamused by not just the war being waged in Ashenvale, but by the very discussion the group was engaging in. The 5th member of the group, a blood elf hunter, simply stayed silent while petting his lynx companion with one hand and holding his intricately adorned bow with the other. Commander Red's brow furrowed, and he let loose a faint growl, clearly angry at this point. The rest of the squadron was also now standing behind the commander, and the large crowd began voicing their disapproval of the 5 defectors. "You shame your ancestors, Kondo," shouted a large black Tauren, shaking his head in disapproval. "Kill the alliance-loving scum," shouted a female orc, pointing her spiked mace at the 5. "Dibs on the Tauren's axe," jeered a goblin with a wide, greedy smile as he gripped his blunderbuss, the voices now becoming more violent and bloodthirsty with each shout. "Do you know what the price is for deserting the horde?" asked Commander Red as he turned back to face Kondo, while reaching over his shoulder to grip his battle axes, then bringing them down to his sides. In an instant, powerful winds began to surround one of the troll shaman's maces, while the other mace shot up a powerful spark and was quickly engulfed in flames. The large Pandaren brought his staff weapon to his side and opened a small keg hanging from the end of it. He then brought the container up to his nose and inhaled the aroma of the brew inside, and he smiled and licked his lips in anticipation of tasting the volatile beverage. The smaller Pandaren drew his two fist weapons, each protruding 3 dagger-like blades from the front, and began to bounce back and forth on the balls of his feet. The Blood Elf Hunter reached back and gripped one of his arrows, sitting in its quiver, while his lynx let out a low and powerful growl as he stood up and faced the crowd. "As I said, Commander, I will not shed Night Elf blood today, and I will also not shed the blood of my Horde brothers," said Kondo Shatterpath as he dropped his weapon to the floor. "So if you must take my life, then I accept that fate." Commander Red did not expect Kondo to run, but he believed the young Tauren would at least fight for his life. The commander recognized a strange sense of honor in Kondo accepting death to spare his Horde brothers, even if he did not agree with it. "Young fool," said the orc as he lowered his weapons. "There's no honor in killing you like this anyway. The Horde doesn't need cowards like you. Go back to your village and never cross my path again. Next time I won't be so kind." With that, the Horde squadron continued their march further into the Calderay lands, while the 5 rebels headed back towards the Barrens. But as the 2 groups went their separate ways, 4 shadowy figures watched from the treetops. "You know what must be done, Dagon," said Valdira duskily in a brooding, smooth tone beneath her black hood. "None may abandon our queen and live," she added. The undead elf was one of Sylvanas Windrunner's Dark Rangers, an elite group of Forsaken hunters unquestionably loyal to the Banshee Queen. "Take Zuko and Malixia, and all of the assassins at your disposal," she added, as her eyes glowed red with hatred. "It shall be done," responded Dagon Dreadblade in a rough, hushed voice. "They will not live to see another sunrise." Dagon was a Deathstalker, a group of elite Forsaken rogues also loyal to Sylvanas Windrunner. As a master of poisons and all other methods of assassination, he was considered by many to be the most lethal of the Banshee Queen's rogues. "Indeed," added Malixia Nightborn, with a subtle smile barely visible through her dark, black hair, which was swept down and obscured most of her face. The Blood Elf was then consumed by the surrounding shadows, and only a faint purple mist remained as she disappeared. "This will be fun," jeered Zuko as he laughed maniacally. He and Dagon then disappeared into the shadows as well, leaving Valdira Dusklily to continue surveying the battlefield below. "Dark Lady, watch over you."